Hello everyone, and welcome to my review for Kingdom Come Deliverance. The first game, not the sequel. I know I'm late to the party. If you're like me, you've seen the near universal praise and high review scores for Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and you're probably wondering, is it worth my time to go back and play the first game, or should I just skip it and start with the sequel? Well, hopefully by the end of this video, I'll be able to help you answer that question for yourself. Keep in mind, I'm not trying to make a blanket recommendation here. I'm just trying to give you my opinion and enough information so you can make an informed decision for yourself. As for me, I bounced off Kingdom Come Deliverance pretty hard when the game first came out in 2018, mostly due to my initial unfavorable impression of the combat. On the surface, it seemed exactly like my kind of game. It's an open-world, immersive sim with challenging combat mechanics, intricate secondary systems, and a smattering of survival elements. But the initial combat encounters during the prologue were so frustrating to manage that I subsequently shelved it. And to be honest, I wish I would have pressed on, because once you get past the prologue, get some training, and start to explore this world, it becomes quite a fun game. Kingdom Come Deliverance takes place in 15th century Bohemia, in a world chock full of beautiful rolling hills, majestic forests, and quaint villages. The story follows Henry, a blacksmith's son who finds himself alone and destitute after an army lays waste to his town. I won't go into the specifics of the story because if you choose to play this game, I think Henry's story is something you should experience for yourself. Henry possesses no money, equipment, or skills, and it's up to the player to take this lowly plebe from zero to hero. His journey is made more challenging by the incorporation of survival elements like the need for food and sleep, and a very limited yet novel save system, and the game's combat mechanics, which are, to put it kindly, not very friendly to new players. If my description of this sounds somewhat negative, let me assure you, these features are in fact the selling points. Warhorse Studios intentionally set out to make a game that is challenging to play, and after playing through it from start to finish, I can safely say, mission accomplished. If you want the quick and dirty explanation of what this game really feels like to play, the best comparison I can make is that it's essentially a mashup of Elder Scrolls Oblivion without the magic and the survival mode from Fallout 4. Kingdom Come Deliverance shares a lot of DNA with the Elder Scrolls. The NPCs are just as wooden and lifeless as the ones in Oblivion, often staring off into space like zombies, and walking around any town feels much the same as it does in any other Elder Scrolls game, with NPCs keeping to their own schedules, which does help make the world feel more alive and realistic, but can also sometimes make tracking down an NPC for a quest a bit difficult. The combat, meanwhile, while mechanically unique and vastly different from other games, also has the same stiff and janky feel of those old Elder Scrolls titles. It's very clear where the various attack and defense animations begin and end, with moves rarely ever chaining together in a satisfyingly smooth sequence. My guess is that anyone who put a significant amount of time into Oblivion will notice the similarities between these two games right away. Where the Fallout 4 comparison comes into play is strictly with the survival and save mechanics. Kingdom Come's default game mode is essentially a clone of Fallout 4's survival mode. The main character requires sleep and food, else they suffer debuffs that limit their abilities, and the player can only save the game when Henry sleeps in certain beds. However, unlike Fallout 4, the player can also save the game one additional way, by consuming a special potion called Savior Schnapps. These potions are somewhat easy to come by as they can be purchased from many vendors throughout the world, and if the player can't find them, they can also be crafted, though that process, like everything in Kingdom Come, is quite involved, favoring immersion over expediency. The limited save system is one of the things that makes Kingdom Come Deliverance unique, and were it not for the unfamiliar and somewhat difficult combat mechanics, I don't think it would have been an issue. But given the fact that the player can't just save whenever they want, and the combat can be difficult in certain situations, it's quite possible to spend a lot of time replaying the same content over and over. And depending on how far back your last save goes, that can mean wasting a lot of time repeating the same sequence of events. Thus, it pays for players to get good as quickly as possible, if for no other reason than to minimize the amount of repetition one must suffer through. On the surface, the combat in Kingdom Come Deliverance does all the same things other games do, allowing Henry to attack, block, parry, and riposte. But the implementation of these maneuvers is quite different from other games, in that all of these maneuvers exist within the tightly controlled confines of locked-on single combat. Once multiple enemies appear, everything goes to hell, in part because of the aggressive nature of the auto-lock system, which makes it difficult, if not impossible at times, to strategically disengage from enemies and engage other nearby opponents, but also because of the way the character animations occur in up-close first-person encounters, which makes everything on the screen difficult to comprehend. And yet, as bad as this can look and feel at times, it doesn't take long to realize this is intentional. Warhorse designed the combat this way on purpose, and there is a method to their madness. Warhorse wanted a combat system that would more closely mirror realism. And in real life, if you stumbled upon a camp of bandits, for instance, no matter how much plate armor you might be wearing, you wouldn't rush headlong into the camp shouting, "Dragons!" It would be stupid to try, because the enemy would overwhelm you with their numbers in short order. Likewise, what would you really do if you were riding down a road and came upon a skirmish between a group of bandits and some foreign mercenaries? You wouldn't just jump into the fray because odds are you'd be killed right away. The smart move, of course, would be to stand back and observe, and pick off the stragglers once the skirmish wound down. And that's what Warhorse wants players to do. They want them to evaluate every situation intelligently before diving headlong into combat. In Kingdom Come, you want to do everything possible to avoid a 3-on-1 or 4-on-1 situation. You want to use stealth, for instance, and sneak into camps during the night to cut down bandits in their sleep or poison their food supply. Or, during the daytime, use archery to pull enemies away, isolate them, and whittle down their numbers until only 1 or 2 of them remain. Only then can you safely engage in open combat. Archery in particular is a really useful tool for clearing bandit camps. Archery itself sucks, and I'll talk more about that later on, but as a tool for pulling enemies, it's fantastic. But the main point I want to make here is that while the combat does initially seem very bad and very clunky, and there is a steep learning curve, there's a purpose behind its design. It is janky, and awkward, and clumsy. And it is very ill-suited to tackling multiple enemies at once, but that's because Warhorse wants you to use your brain and approach each situation intelligently. Your job is to find a way to whittle down groups of opponents until it's safe to engage with numbers that favor you and not the enemy. I mentioned that archery sucks. As a lifelong archer, I cannot begin to tell you how frustrating this mechanic is. I have been shooting a bow and arrow since I was 7 years old. My parents owned an archery pro shop while I was growing up. Archery is in my blood, you could say. I've shot every kind of bow there is, from compounds to recurves to longbows, and I have participated in every kind of hunting, fishing, and shooting tournament one can do with a bow, even going so far as to take up the Olympic style and get sponsors for the trials. I have boxes full of trophies sitting in my basement, and I've shot a Pope and Young record big game animal. In short, I know what I'm talking about when it comes to archery, and this is not how you do it. It's close though. Warhorse gets half the equation right, but the part they get wrong, they get really wrong. For whatever reason, Warhorse decided to implement archery so that immediately after drawing the bow back, Henry's arm sways left to right and is very difficult to control, making it almost impossible to aim correctly and make a proper shot. Now, I don't have a problem with them removing the aiming reticule in the center of the screen once Henry brings out his bow. That's something that some players complained about, but to me, a lifelong archer who is very used to shooting instinctive style, that's natural. There is no sight on a recurve or a longbow, so I was kind of happy to see this. I've always enjoyed shooting instinctively anyway. Give me 2 or 3 practice shots with any bow to figure out its trajectory and see how the arrows come off the riser, and I can put a batch of arrows in a pie plate at 20 yards, no problem. But the thing with longbows and recurves is they can't be held for a long time, especially not at high draw weights. So pre-aiming before drawing the string back is the key to being successful with them. Then, right as your hand reaches its anchor point, quickly make any micro adjustments to your aim before releasing the arrow. If a shooter doesn't release their arrow right away after drawing the bow back, they will fatigue quickly. Their arm will start to shake, and any chance of making a smooth release and an accurate shot goes out the window. Warhorse gets the fatigue part of this equation correct. The longer Harry holds his bow, the more he shakes, which is accurate. What's not accurate is Henry's inability to precisely control the bow during the draw and for the first second after bringing it back to full draw. When shooting a longbow or a recurve, because they're so hard to hold for any length of time, we always aim first, and we get very good at aiming before drawing. When the bow initially comes to full draw, the shooter is in possession of all their strength, and this is when it's easiest to aim. So we pre-aim the bow at the target, draw it back smoothly, and then quickly fine-tune the aim point in a split second before releasing. But the key here is that 99% of the aiming has already been done before drawing the bow back. It's already on target before we tug on the string. The fine tuning only takes a split second because, again, the bow is hard to hold at full draw. So we want to do this while we're in full possession of our strength, and that's when it's easiest to make adjustments. But because Henry's arm has this annoying left to right sway that starts pretty much the moment he begins to draw the bow, and this motion can't be stopped or controlled, it makes it nigh impossible to fine-tune his aim point once he's at full draw, and it basically negates any aiming you do before you start drawing. And so it makes it impossible to make a decent shot the way a real archer would do it. The way this system should work is that Henry's arm shouldn't sway as he's drawing the bow, and he should have full, precise control over aiming for the first half second or 1 second after drawing the bow. The better he becomes with the weapon, the longer this precise aiming window should be open. There should be no sway here, except maybe among the most novice shooters, like when Henry's level 1 or whatever. But again, this is why we teach people to aim before drawing and then have them shoot quickly when reaching full draw, because trying to hold all that weight back is the enemy of a good shot. The shaking should start to happen only after that initial window of precision fades, and then the shaking should rapidly increase the longer Henry tries to hold it, which is how the game works. From what I could determine, even though Henry's skill with the bow improves, his sway and shake while he draws never get any better. Even with a potion that was supposed to buff my archery skill, he still had this difficult to control sway when he first starts to draw a bow back. From the opening moments of the game to the final end battle, I was never able to adequately control a bow in those first important split seconds. And for that reason, archery was never fun or enjoyable, which is a shame because since I've been 7 years old, this has been one of my favorite things to do. I love archery. It's my jam. Shooting a bow is really fun, and Warhorse made it an exercise in frustration. Archery aside, Kingdom Come's combat does find an enjoyable groove after a while, but it never feels fully satisfying. The main problem is that it lacks weight. Even once you learn the key technical maneuvers like blocking and master strikes, which is Kingdom Come's way of handling a parry and a riposte all in one move, the combat never impresses. Part of the reason for that is that ripostes just never look or feel as devastating as they really are. A proper master strike can lop off huge chunks of an enemy's health, but when it comes to the animation, it's little more than pushing an enemy backward with the tip of your sword or poking them under the chin with a hammer. I love the idea of a parry and a riposte combo all wrapped up in a master strike, but the execution lacks punch, and that leaves the combat feeling lackluster. Even when you finally do kill an enemy, it's not very dramatic. It has all the same feel as killing NPCs in Oblivion. 1 second the character is standing in front of you, and the next second they've fallen over. There's no cool finishing animation, no drama, just a crumpled body. The only time Henry gets to truly run his sword through someone is when he performs a mercy kill on a foe who's already fallen and is gonna die in about another second anyway. And even then, we only get to see Henry's face. The end result is a combat system that feels more or less like knocking over paper dolls. Not that Kingdom Come needs to be all Assassin's Creed Valhalla or anything, but it could have benefited from a system that felt a little less timid and a little more visceral. Despite the issues with the combat, the game is still enjoyable to play, mostly. I do have my issues with the overall gameplay though, and those issues primarily revolve around the design of certain quests and the pacing of the late game. These issues are probably the kind of issues that won't bother a lot of other players, but they bug the hell out of me, so let me enumerate. Regular viewers of my channel know that my least favorite quest in the whole world is the take all your equipment and send you to jail quest. I hate this quest with a passion because A, it removes all my hard-earned gear from my character, even if only temporarily, and B, it stuffs me in an isolated part of the game world for an unknown length of time, which prevents me from doing what I want to do when I want to do it. The joy of open world games, at least for me, is that you can shift your attention to a different part of the game if you get bored of one particular aspect of it. For instance, I often experience a bit of fatigue if there are too many cutscenes in a row, so I'll take a break from advancing the story and go find some bandits to kill. Or if I don't feel like doing that, I might quietly go hunting some game in a forest and work on improving my hunting and archery skills. Or maybe I'm in the mood to just ride around the countryside looking for new opportunities to make trouble. But the point is, in an open world game, whatever I'm in the mood to do, I can go do it until some developer stuffs me in jail. And the vast majority of the time, developers want to stuff you in jail not because of anything illegal that your character has done, but for mechanical plot reasons, which stink. And unfortunately, every single RPG developer in the world seems insistent on putting some variant of this quest in their game, including Warhorse. In fact, much to my chagrin, they found a whole new way to implement this quest and make it even more annoying. At a certain point in the game, our dear boy Henry is asked to infiltrate a monastery. This means giving up all his worldly possessions and confining himself to the monastery grounds. If this sounds a lot like going to jail, that's because it is. But this quest is made worse by the fact that you're expected to perform your monthly duties during the daytime, under threat of punishment if you do not adhere to your strict hourly schedule. So not only are you trying to investigate the monastery, find your target, and kill them, you're also constantly being hounded by enforcer monks called circuiters, who are there to make sure you don't stray from your daily chores. If this sounds fun to anyone, raise your hand. No one? Bueller? I thought as much. Buried within this infiltration quest are a series of other side quests, like a pair of circuiters who want you to sneak off the monastery grounds and acquire a barrel of wine, which necessitates another side quest to steal some food in order to trade it for a lockpick from another monk. So not only is this quest annoying, it's also not short. It doesn't take long for this quest to wear out its welcome. After an hour of trying to carry out this charade, I simply gave up and started choking out the circuiters and leaving their corpses in darkened corners of the monastery. This was an awful quest from start to finish. It killed the pacing of the game and derailed my playthrough for several annoying and frustrating hours. Honestly, as soon as I realized what this quest entailed and how long I was going to be stuck inside this monastery, I almost rage quit and deleted the game. Another annoying quest happens late in the game, and it's a quest design that I've seen other developers use as well, and I really wish they would stop. What I'm talking about here are quests that are designed to fail. In this particular case, Henry must infiltrate a castle with some allies in order to rescue some captives. This begins with a very long sequence where Henry must wait for his allies to climb super long ladders, and then he must silently assassinate two guards stationed close together. It is incredibly easy to fail at killing these guards silently, even with great stealth stats and proper gear. And since there's no way to save the game before making this attempt, it's likely you'll fail and then end up having to replay this part over and over again in a vain attempt to succeed. And unfortunately, there's no way for the player to know that winning isn't an option. Had I known that failure was mandatory, I would have simply attacked the nearest guard loudly and then retreated to the ladder once the alarm sounded. There's no point continuing this quest because it can't be successfully completed. I really hate it when developers design quests this way, because players like me will try over and over to succeed, thinking there's gotta be some way to win, but not knowing that there isn't. When a quest requires failure for the plot to move forward, the better choice is to simply use a cutscene. Because the truth is, when a quest is hard-coded to fail, you've already robbed the player of all agency. Might as well go all the way and just make it a cinematic scene. That's less frustrating for the player, and the outcome is exactly the same. The third annoyance I have with the game is the pacing of the main quest. After this castle infiltration quest goes wrong, as it's supposed to, a siege begins, and Henry is tasked with riding out to acquire several important supplies and reinforcements. I knew before he even got started on this quest that none of this was going to be simple. Every single one of these requests was going to turn into a sub-quest, and the whole thing was going to balloon. And I was right. I found this really annoying because at this particular point in the game, the main story has created a heightened sense of urgency and a whole lot of momentum. And at that point, all I wanted to do was continue pushing the main narrative forward. But instead, the developers decided to switch gears and bog the whole thing down with what amounted to a bunch of pointless fetch quests and busy work. Pacing is a really important part of storytelling, and when a main quest ramps up, you don't want to slow it down. You want to propel it forward even further. The developers at CD Projekt Red, for example, understood this when they made Cyberpunk. There comes a point in time in that game when all the various main threads of the story coalesce. And from that point on, V is engaged in the main story and only the main story. CD Projekt Red didn't grind the game to a halt there and force V to divert his attention to unnecessary tangential side quests and busy work. No, they focused on the main story because they knew they'd built momentum and they needed to keep it going right up until the climactic finish. But Warhorse didn't understand how to do that, at least with this game. And so it suffers from an aborted climax, which I think we all understand is not a good thing. I've griped about how Archery is implemented, the design and pacing of certain quests, and how the melee combat isn't very friendly to new players. And yet, despite all of these negatives, I still had a lot of fun playing the game. For starters, while this is an open world, it's one of the smaller ones I've experienced, and I actually think that's a good thing because the smaller size gives players a chance to actually get to know the landscape, to learn all the different regions and towns, and familiarize themselves with the roads and routes that tie them together, to learn where the bandit camps are and which towns have a tailor versus which towns have blacksmiths. In addition, the secondary systems like alchemy are very immersive. Yes, it's slower to make potions this way, and rarely did I feel like sitting down to make a large batch of them when making even one potion required quite a bit of effort. But I appreciated how the developer wasn't willing to sacrifice their vision of realism for the sake of expediency. And it's worth noting, there are perks that can make this process faster and can make more potions at a time. So once again, leveling up in this game does have a real tangible benefit. I also love that enemies dropped all the loot they were carrying, as it made wealth gain and gear acquisition fun. I personally love trying to find those perfect armor and clothing combinations that allow my character to be well armored but also sneaky. I also really liked the way skills were handled. Borrowing once again from the Elder Scrolls, the more you use a skill, the faster it levels up, and every few levels you get a new perk. There aren't a ton of perks, but I found that to be a good thing because then character progression wasn't flooded with a bunch of perks that felt meaningless, like plus 2% to attack or some other bullshit like that. And I loved how they handled reading. It's an actual skill in Kingdom Come, and Henry can get better at it over time, allowing him to read more advanced books, which can then level up some of his other skills. And reading anything actually improves his ability, including reading maps, which I thought was a really nice touch. There can be a fair bit of waiting around in this game. Passing time waiting for the sun to go down or come up, or waiting for an NPC to open their shop, etc. And so, just like in real life where I always have a book with me to kill time, it was fun to let Henry catch up on his reading during these slower moments and thus improve some of his other skills as well. Most of all, I just liked roaming the countryside on horseback and sneaking through the woods to go hunting and clearing bandit camps. That part was a blast. Some of my favorite films fall apart toward the end. Event Horizon is a good example. I absolutely love the setup in the first hour, but the second half of that movie doesn't really work for me. And the same is true of Sunshine, another film that is perfect for the first hour and then abruptly falls apart after it takes an inexplicable left turn with a tonal shift that completely changes the movie. Kingdom Come Deliverance is kind of like those films. It's a game that starts off strong, albeit with a bit of a learning curve with regards to the combat, and then it ramps up really nicely, only to shit the bed when it moves into the final act. Does that mean it's not worth playing? No. But the way the game falls down in that final act makes it difficult for me to give this a rousing endorsement. For starters, it has a serious amount of jank in it. From NPCs blocking riders on horseback, to a pair of bathhouse maidens doing the Blade Runner 2049 Mariette Joy sync-up, the whole thing feels like a game made 20 years ago. Couple that with a combat system that has a steep learning curve, archery that absolutely sucks ass, and the Sasau Monastery, which frankly became my own personal house of horrors, and it makes it difficult for me to recommend this game to anyone except perhaps the most die-hard players who love the concept of a medieval immersion sim and don't mind a lot of jank. And yet, much like some of those old janky games like Oblivion, there is a certain favorable charm to Kingdom Come. Henry is a likable enough protagonist, and his story is a sympathetic and entertaining one. The open world is scenic and enjoyable to travel, and certain activities like the weekly tournament help make it feel more alive and lived in. Some of the quests are quite enjoyable too, though the developers do lean too heavily on fetch quests and infiltration quests for my liking. Personally, I could have used some more straight up go clear these bandit out type of quests. Overall, the game was fun to play, and I found myself looking forward to each opportunity to play it, but too often I left my play sessions frustrated. I sign off every video I make with the phrase happy gaming because that's honestly what I hope for everyone who plays video games. I want to play games that make me happy, and I want to suggest games to people that I think will make them happy. Yet too often, even the best games have moments where poor design decisions lead to incredible amounts of frustration and disappointment. And that's what happens with Kingdom Come Deliverance, especially toward the end where the pacing is just disastrous. If you're planning on playing the sequel and you're unsure whether you should play this game first or not, my suggestion would be to play it so you can experience Henry's story in conjunction with this game world, because I think you'll appreciate the whole experience more than just relying on flashbacks in the sequel to learn Henry's origin story. But my caveat is, if you're the kind of gamer who, like me, gets easily frustrated by poor quest design and bad narrative pacing, it might be worth it to just skip this and jump straight into the sequel. So there you have it, my much too late review for Kingdom Come Deliverance. Personally, I'm really looking forward to playing the sequel because the review scores are fantastic, which tells me that Warhorse must have listened to the players and fixed or improved a lot of the issues that people had with the first game. So I'm really looking forward to playing that one. I'm Colors Fade, and if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, consider subscribing to my channel, and until next time, happy gaming, everyone.